Welcome to everybody. This is our second free monthly webinar, and thank you to everyone who did attend last month's. Your feedback on the surveys was really helpful to Jennifer and I in figuring out which topics we wanted to cover for these monthly webinars, especially for the first few. If you missed last month's, it is recorded on our website with the full recording of what we walked through, which was mostly how to get an account, how to set it up, and what are all the features that LibreTexts offers. So it's a great crash course in just what LibreTexts offers in terms of services, but also libraries and learning materials. So feel free to check that out. The most requested webinar was to talk about authoring your own textbook and contributing that to LibreTexts. So that's what this month's webinar is on. The second most requested one was how do I make a custom book from existing resources, and that will be the webinar for next month. So you'll notice that there's a couple of things that I'll gloss over today because they'll be covered in more detail in next month's webinar. Including just the stereotypical how do you add a page and edit that page will be more detailed next week. This will talk about how do you get started actually building a textbook and getting it off and running for either you or you and your team of people who will be working on it. And feel free to ask some questions in the chat. Jennifer will be moderating that and answering as we go. And she'll interrupt me if there's anything I need to take a look at. Otherwise, the goal is to get through this in about 40 minutes or so, and then leave some minutes at the end for questions. And there are slide numbers in the bottom right corner. So if you want to ask a question on a specific slide or have me go back to it, just make a little note for yourself. And then we can go back and do the questions at the end. All right. So today, the main goals that we're going to be looking for is understanding what the structure of our libraries is. So when you want to publish something, where does it go? Learn how to navigate in the Commons to see what sorts of books are there and what your book will look like when you do publish it. Understanding a really basic idea of what OER means for writing books and for licensing them. And how to use the LibreTexts Conductor will be a big chunk of today's talk, along with how we go about publishing it. So what is the actual steps and what does it look like to get a book into the publication stage? And lastly, where to go if you need some extra support in writing these books. And the things don't. The construction guide is out right away because we have a fairly large book already published on how to edit books, how to incorporate things into your textbook, and how to write them. And that is the construction guide. If you're at our LibreTexts Academy page, it's under the faculty resources there. It is a textbook, so we had to put it somewhere, and it currently lives in our oldest library, which is in the chemistry library. So don't be surprised if you end up going over to the chemistry library. If you have a library access to any of our libraries, you'll have access to that one to log in and be able to read that construction guide there. Since they're all built on the same platform, all the things apply to all of them. We just didn't want to keep track of all of them at the same time. So that's where it ends up. And in there, you'll find basic fundamentals about it, and a lot of things about how to do the very detailed work of editing. So I would say from chapter 8 down is all on more detailed minutia of when you want to look up how to do something. That's where you'll go. And the beginning of it goes over a lot of the stuff that we'll be talking about today. In fact, our first webinar talked about the fundamentals of LibreTexts and the Commons. Today we'll be talking about the conductor and getting started on writing a book. And then next webinar will be on remixing and basic editing. So we're going through there. There are a couple sections in there on the pedagogy of how to design online textbooks. So for those of you who are more familiar with traditional hard copy textbooks and how those are laid out and what sorts of things go into those, sometimes there's a pedagogical difference to using them online. I'm kind of pointing that out here because that was actually my work that I did for my graduate work, is design of online textbooks. We might have a future webinar on the pedagogy of online textbook design, but right now that's not on the future. But if you are interested in it, shoot us an email. There are a lot of things that are available to everyone in LibreTexts, and those are what we call our like resources for doing homework, like Adapt or writing tools. And of the most important ones for today are the Commons and the Conductor. So these are resources that we'll use. One is a catalog of all the textbooks that we have, and Conductor is our project management system of how to build textbooks and keep track of your progress to make sure things move through the pipeline. This will get a book published into one of our many libraries. So we have all of these libraries. They are fairly broad. For instance, the number of things that are in the humanities library is very large, whereas the chemistry one basically just has all of chemistry major materials and intro materials. And then there's ones like the Spanish one, which has a bunch of libraries inside of it because it has a chemistry library for Spanish-speaking students. So that's one of our multi-language uh, opportunities. So in addition to teaching Spanish, the Spanish library also has textbooks in Spanish for other courses. Um, and within any given library, once you get into that library, you'll always see three different types of resources. There's campus bookshelves, there's bookshelves, and there's learning objects. Campus bookshelves are instructor curated and syllabus based textbooks. So basically, we're only going to put things in this book that this instructor wants. They curated it, and it's for that class at that school. And then there's the traditional standalone textbooks, or what you'd find in the bookshelves. So if you just want to use something off the shelf for your class, kind of the old traditional model of using a published textbook from a publishing company, that'd be where you'd find that. And we have authors who want to contribute a book to the bookshelf. I wrote a great introduction to composition book. It's been helpful for me and a lot of my colleagues. I'm going to put that out there for other people to use. As it is, that's a bookshelf book. Or you can say, hey, we teach this really interesting nursing, but also communication course that has to do with health sciences in the real world, but it's really only applicable to this type of a course at our institution, but I want to share it with other people in my institution. That might end up being something in a campus bookshelf. Um, in addition to that, we do have learning objects, which we're not going to talk about today, but those would be like laboratory exercises, modules that you could do a module on some specific topic, current events modules, interactive things, things that would be what we call ancillary materials or supplemental to a textbook or to a course itself. Within the bookshelf, so I mentioned earlier the humanities ones, when you click on that bookshelf, which is the standalone textbooks, those are usually broken apart in either to subdisciplines or into disciplines. So in the humanities, you'll see the beginning there of art, composition, dance, history, humanities. There's a lot of different things that are in this library, and they're broken down into that category. And then within composition, those are broken down further into types of courses that might be in that subdiscipline, or that, in this case, that discipline, grammar, introductory composition, etc. So your book will end up being, if you publish it publicly, into a bookshelf as a standalone book that you'd want everyone to use. This is what the navigation will look like to where we'll store that book. Like with many libraries, finding the book and how they're stored is not always the best way to find them from scratch. So we'll talk about how you can actually access these a lot easier elsewhere. Unpublished work, however, won't show up there. So if you're worried about, well, what if I start writing a book, but it's not really ready for other people to see yet? Unpublished work starts in unpublished state in our workbench. If you're on one of our websites right now, but you're not logged in, you will not see the workbench. The workbench is only available to people who have books in it and that have some sort of instructor access once they log in. Once that's all done, you'll ask us to publish it, and then it will move from that workbench area into the appropriate location. So it's not your job to figure out where it goes, although feel free to tell us where you think it should go pedagogically. And then that will also get that book published into a format that we'll talk about later for more widely accessible use. When you're at a book, if you're looking at a book, you can tell if it's published or not based on all those rainbow buttons you'll see at the top. The rainbow buttons of buying a print copy or downloading different versions or getting the full complete compiled PDF saying that you've adopted this textbook, all these things only appear if the page is public and it's been put into the appropriate bookshelf. If you are an author on a book, you will also see this Conductor project linked, which we'll talk about in a minute. If you're not an author on that book, you will not see that. So if you happen to want to go to look at one of the books, if you're not listed as an author on that book, you'll see everything else, but you won't see that conductor project link. Or if you happen to see it, it won't actually bring you to the right project, or you might get an error. If it's a book that's not published, you'll notice that it's listed as semi-private, and none of these buttons show up there. All those things, we don't take the time to publish things to a print copy version or a full PDF version until the book is done enough for other people to use it that way. So we keep it in that hidden way. And actually, a lot of faculty would prefer it. I mean, I know I would prefer if I had a book that was in progress to not have a bunch of people sending me emails saying, you don't have this correct yet. I'm like, well, I know, I'm still working on it. So they stay in the unpublished version until it's all ready, and then it'll be available for everyone. So that is kind of where books go, how they live, and then how we get them to be displayed to people. If you're looking at authoring a textbook, I'm going to walk through these 5 steps. First, you should look at what we have available in our library. What else might be out there that you can use as a resource? How do you start your project? And then we finally will get to in step 4, what do you actually do? So I'm trying really hard to emphasize the fact that step 1 should not be start writing. Step 1 should be making sure we know how it's going to fit into the library, what sorts of things are out there, and how we can be efficient with this. And then finally, at the very end, we'll talk briefly about how to publish, because that's actually not something that you need to worry about too much. You just ask us to do it. So starting off with, how do we find out what we already have? I mentioned that once it gets published, it'll go into the Commons, and I told you it'll be either in the campus bookstore or it will be inside of the bookshelf, and it will be in a subdiscipline folder, which will have a course description and blah, 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 blah. That's obviously not the best way to find a book. Within the Commons, you will see that we have all these books and search functions and filter functions and all these sorts of things. So this is actually where we encourage people to go look for books. So if you're on the Commons, then you can go search for the book, the subject that you're looking at. You can see what library it's in by those little icons there. This is the mathematics one. What school is hosting it as part of their library, and then who the authors are. So you can go through and see a lot of that information. You can sort by school, by author. You can take a look at different subjects or just look within certain libraries. And once you go click on one of the books, you get all of the access that you'd like in terms of what licensing it has, what library it's in, once again, the sources that have it, as well as the breakdown of the table of contents, all that stuff that you get through the Commons once the book is published. We have a lot more than books. If you watched last month's webinar, you'll know that we also do have homework and printable versions and downloadable versions of these sorts of things. And all of that is also accessible through our Commons. And I encourage you to go take a look at the recording of last month's if you wanted to get some more in there. So that's a place you can go to find what do we already have accessible to us. Since we are an OER library, that means our material is openly licensed. So you can take, modify, and use it. Which means you don't need to write everything from scratch. If you are looking at things, you can use other places. Of course, there's ways to bring those in and make sure that the citations and sources preserved. Within our library, you'll also notice that there's a couple different versions of textbooks that you might find. Like I said, this is OER, so this is not proprietary. Some people release it completely, don't even need to tell anybody who wrote it. You can feel free to use this in your own book and don't even tell us who it is. Or most commonly, it is licensed that you can take, modify, but please do give attribution to who worked on it before you. When you go into one of these areas, you might see books that just have a name, but it might in parentheses say where that might have come from. OpenStax is one example of an OER library that has material that can be used and modified and reused in a different way because it is open. There's also maps. Every once in a while you might see a map as a type of textbook. This is actually where Brown here wrote a general chemistry textbook that has an order in it that we happen to like. A lot of professors use this book because they like the order. But once we made the textbook, we actually made it out of pages that existed from other people's. So in other words, chapter 1 might be called introduction to chemistry and the periodic table, but that content is actually stuff that someone else out there wrote, and then just we put it in the order, the same order as Brown. If you have one with people's author names after it and no word map, that means all the pages in there were actually written by that team or by that author themselves. So if you're looking to author a textbook itself and contribute to the Gen Chem textbook library, it would show up here with your name after it. And it would not have the word map in front of it. It wouldn't have some other work. You can also make custom remixes. So this is an example of somebody who, instead of using chapters, just made, hey, I want to put all of the books that I want for chapter 1 test in one unit, and then that's going to be all of those. So this person made their own book by pulling sections from wherever she wanted into one specific textbook. That's really a custom textbook, and that kind of stuff we're going to talk about a lot next month. So that's not starting from scratch. That's definitely, I'm just going to modify these sorts of things. How do we author and incorporate material? Where does this material come from? Really, there's 5 mechanisms, and this is taken straight out of that construction guide that I linked to earlier. 1, student contribution from scratch. So you can have assignments in your class for students to write. I want you to write a section on this, and give them extra credit, or you can make it part of their learning assignment. There's a lot of ways to get faculty to get their students to write things or help you to write papers, and it can be part of a good pedagogical approach. You can also do student integration of existing content outside the LibreTexts from faculty and experts, so writing reviews or summaries, things like that, or taking things from an existing OER source and updating them. For instance, maybe there's a book that you've used at your university for a long time that's openly licensed, but it's just out of date. Maybe how it's written or the actual references in there could be updated with more modern examples. Faculty can construct things from raw, which I think a decent number of people wanted this webinar because they have things they've written themselves over the years. Number 4, faculty can integrate existing content, and this is what I mentioned earlier, other OER sources either within our library or other OER sources elsewhere, and they want to incorporate that into their book or make one that's just a map from existing content. And 5, faculty and student can be re-editing content. So maybe you're going to build a textbook from your materials, other people's OER materials, make that, and then give some editing access to certain pages for faculty, or have them work on Microsoft Word or something like that to kind of redo these ones. I've done that in my classes multiple times, and many people who've worked with LibreTexts have given these sort of, hey, I want you to rewrite this, but I want you to do it for environmental science. The textbook doesn't really mention the environment here, but there's some really great examples we could incorporate in there. It's a great pedagogical assignment. This collaborative authoring of OER material between faculty and students is actually called open pedagogy, and it's something that we've embraced at LibreTexts for a long time as a great way to make education collaborative, which also makes students invest into the textbook a lot more than if they're just assigned to read it. And it's great, especially I find it really useful for first-year students who are still understanding why they need to have a textbook. So that's what else you can look at out there, ways you can get material into the LibreTexts, how you want to think about writing it in general. So how do you start this? Let's think about formats and what we call harvesting, and then remixing. So we recently just had a promotion with our group of Preeti, and Preeti has been working with our harvesting team and integration for a long time. In that link that's up there to an older version of our construction guide, one that needs to be revamped and brought into the new one, there's a whole bunch of lists of things like, hey, I'm going to start from scratch. I'm going to start from a website that's online. I'm going to start from a PDF. I'm going to start from Word. I'm going to go from Google Doc all the way down to EPUB and other sorts of LaTeX source even. There are steps that we can work with you to get these things harvested. That's a phrase we use. We like the word integration too, or importing. All these things kind of work. It's a way to bring things into our library. And again, the reason that we like to do this is that our ecosystem is built for collaborative work, sharing the material, and being able to make these sort of custom pedagogical approaches to things. If you do happen to have material or existing OER material that you want to start from, or some files that we might be able to help you get into library as a starting point, if you're logged into the conductor on the side, it's on the left-hand side of the conductor page, there is a harvesting request button, which will take you to a form, which you can fill out, and that'll go to Preeti and her team to work on helping to get like a baseline structure of a textbook in place right off the bat for you. We do recommend that if you love LibreTexts, but you've been using this OER source for a long time and you don't want to change that, well, okay, let's just bring it into our library because we're a curated library of good, useful materials that faculty like to use in their classes. We are not a publishing company. Um, so anything we can do to make our library useful is similar to thinking about going to your library at your institution saying, hey, I really, really like you to have this book on your shelf so I can use it in my courses. That's the model we look at. Next month, we'll talk a little bit more in detail about this, but I wanted to introduce it. The way we have this remixer is that we can have your book on one side, and then you can access all of our libraries. Right now, this one says business, but you can look at all those bookshelves and under construction things, mix and match, drag and drop them over into your other book, and build up a rough course here. I highly encourage this as a first step for authoring a textbook to younger faculty. One of the best pieces of advice I got as a new faculty member was no matter how much you want to change 17 things from semester 1 to semester 2, restrict yourself to only changing one thing a term. And that way you don't burn out and don't get yourself frustrated with trying to change too many things at once without knowing how they depend on each other. So we would actually say, hey, why don't you start with a copy of an existing textbook that you like? You can add and delete things as you want. And then semester by semester, you could say, you know what, this time I'm going to rewrite chapter 5. Chapter 5 is going to be the one that I'm going to take a look at and really put that into the way that I would like it to be. So this would be a long-term sort of way to write a textbook that really has your pedagogical nuance to it, the way you want to approach things, without saying, I just need to write the whole entire book this summer from scratch. Okay, so that's giving us some sorts of formats we can start off with, how we do harvesting and remixing. So now we're finally getting to the point of how I'm ready to start. I'm ready to start building my textbook. What do I go? What do I do? And that would be the LibreTexts Conductor. So when you go to LibreTexts, that conductor, which you can access either anytime you see that little launchpad icon in the corner, the rocket ship, you click there, you can click on the conductor, and it'll take you to here if you're logged in with your account. Each of the books that we have is tied to a conductor project. So this is not a choice of I would like to write a book without using a project management system. They come together. This is kind of new, so if you worked with us a long time ago, you might have been like, well, I used to just go straight there and start editing something. That's no longer the way that we do things because we need to keep track of too much metadata, and we're focusing a lot on making sure we have quality data to support our library system, our course catalog, and things like that. So once you have this conductor page, which we call a project, it gives you all the tools that you'd need. It lets you manage who has authoring access to all of your pages in your book. You can create tasks. You can manage your communication with your team. You can access that remixer and customization tools straight here. You can do peer review where you would have faculty or other people that you might want to have review your book. They can submit peer review, and then you can look at that here. We also have accessibility tools, and we have some new AI and alt text materials that I'll go through. Once you are in the conductor, it'll look like this, and at the top, it's almost easy to miss because it is so big. That large green plus sign is creating a new conductor project. When you create that project, it opens the screen basically blank, and then you can go through and start filling out the material that you need to know to build this. For your own knowledge, we use our conductor to work on textbooks and harvesting, and we also use it to manage other projects. So if you wanted to make a project which was on like, hey, we're going to do a workshop and we like to use this conductor, feel free to use it to make a project for something else as well. It's not just for textbooks, but obviously we're going to focus on that because that's what most of you use. If you, at the top of the conductor page, there's all the properties that you'll see. So this is what you'll see when you'll log in. You can edit where those sources from. So if you are taking it from some other place that is OER and you're going to bring it into the library, either working with us or on your own, then you can edit those sources. Especially we need to know where the licensing is, and you can make a link directly to it. There's project properties, what library it's going to go into, what kind of class it is, whether it's a curation or whether it's something else, whether the status is completed. All these things you can edit there. And you can edit all the notes. These are all accessible by editing the edit properties of the project. And all of this edit properties is located at the very top. Sometimes we call this our rainbow bar, but it's our easy access tools across the top for how you're supposed to access all the different parts of our project management. So that's the editing properties. That lets you edit everything that you see here. And the next one across is our management for managing your team. We've got 4 different types of team members you can have on your team. A team lead, which is basically the person who can manage who's on the team and who has access to the book. Team members are other authors that will be working with you on this project. They can be assigned tasks. They can work on editing things. They can work on making new pages, things like that. You can also have a project liaison. This is intended for a campus admin, maybe the OER librarian who's helping oversee your project and keeping things moving on a task. They do have editing access, so they can do things like, proofread and whatnot, but it's not intended for an actual author, but it's intended for somebody who's working to edit and author things. And then we have a project auditor. So this is somebody who can access the project team page, and they can also access the book, but they can't edit it. This is commonly used for someone who might be reviewing it, or if you have someone else on campus, maybe a dean who wants to look at your work, but you don't want them to be going through and text and changing it. Maybe do not want is not the phrase you should use with them, but you're going to restrict that access so they can look at the progress you're making without necessarily being able to edit anything. I'm going to jump over to the timeline. There's a whole set of task management. So here's an example of working on task within chapter 1, chapter 2, but you could break it down into, we're going to do graphics first, then we're going to work on our structure, pre-writing, maybe our meetings. And each of these can have start dates and end dates. So these you can see one of those is overdue. And we can build lots of different tools in terms of adding these, making subtasks, and assigning them to different people on the team so they get notified that they have a task. Within there, you can, oops, I jumped ahead there. Ooh. 1 second. Something got out of order when I moved these around. I want to jump down. Well, we'll probably just have to go ahead and see it when we see it. I don't want to take up too much time looking. But we can also do Gantt charts and calendars, so you can take a look at, when you click that timeline button at the top, all of your tasks that have start dates and end dates. You can see the Gantt chart, which is really helpful if you are working with a large team, or if there's an administrator on your campus who's trying to keep things moving and helping you with that progress of a textbook authoring. Those might be tools that they would like to be able to use quite easily. In addition to that, we have the accessibility tools. This is really powerful. It allows you to do a high-level automated accessibility check for, can you use the keyboard to access all the content? Do all the images have alt text? All the alt text under 50 characters? Do all the links work? Are they properly labeled? In other words, like third-party URL destinations. For all of your text, do you have the right contrast levels? And then we can do an automated test. I'm not telling you that it is perfect, but it's a great tool for looking page by page in your book to see what sorts of things you might need to look at to make things a little cleaner. Also, accessibility, I want to throw this out there just because it's a feature not a lot of people know about. We do have what we call our reader mode. So from any page in our LibreText, you can click on the reader mode, which brings up this much more screen reader friendly, and then just general, a lot more reader friendly view of the textbook. So it gets rid of that title on the top and all the edit buttons and all those sorts of things. And it's just the text, kind of like in a normal scrolled website view, along with an easy to access table of contents on the left for jumping around and taking a look at different things. So if you don't know about the reader mode, that's another thing that we kind of emphasize for accessibility. It makes our websites really easy for students to use. Other things in the conductor, I mentioned there's all those things at the top. This is also where you would access that OER remixer. And once you start building your textbook, even though it's called the remixer, once you have the textbook and you want to start adding pages, building pages, moving pages around, you will use the OER remixer to do that. You'll just not be importing material into it, but you'll still be using the plus sign at the top to add your new page, dragging and dropping things to move it around. And that's because the remixer has an auto numbering capacity so that all of your chapters and subchapters will get automatically renumbered. So if you drag and drop, move them around, you don't have to go to those other pages and change the number of this is actually section 1.3 now, and that's section 1.4 now. And it will do the numbering that way. We do have built-in tags that you would use when you do figures and equations, so that if you use the special tag, it'll automatically renumber all of your figures and equation numbers as well. So you should never ever be typing figure 1.1. You would just type in figure and a little piece of code, which is in the construction guide, and that will renumber things according to when it gets cycled through this renumber. There's also reader resources. So on that reader view, you can add some extra resources that you'd like students to be able to access. I mean, if you're in chemistry, you always have access to like the periodic table, but there might be some extra resources that you would be calling an appendix or something like that for your textbook. And you can add those there so they're always accessible on that sidebar nice and easily. In addition to that, within the product in the conductor project, you can upload resources that you would like to be public. You can also upload resources that you want to be private just for your team to see. But if you make things public, then inside of our catalog, you'll see there'll be this assets. So if you upload it to the conductor, PowerPoint presentations that accompany this book, then when somebody goes to that book on our catalog, they'll see that those resources are available for people to do. So if you're not just authoring a textbook, but you also have slide presentations that you'd like to have available, remember these are publicly available. So you don't want to put like answer keys to sample tests unless you really want to make those public. But you can put those things there so that people can find them, use them, and so it's more than just a textbook. Conductor, I mentioned, also does communication. So there are threaded discussion threads, which you can have notifications sent to the team or notifications sent to just one member of the team or to a couple people on the team. And you can keep all of your threaded information on the different parts of the textbook that you're working on. This same conversation, there's a thread associated with each task. So if you want to have a conversation about chapter 1, what's the progress on this chapter? That's something that you can do as a team lead in order to make sure you're keeping track with things and keeping the discussion aligned with whichever section you're working on. All right, we're going to jump back to the AI co-author. This is a new tool that we were just bringing in. It works really well. We don't want you to use AI to write your textbooks. That's not the point here. But there is very tedious work that AI is very good at. And we found that it's the best way to utilize this and leverage it to make our authors work easier is helping it to write summaries of their chapters and their pages, because we like to have those for search functions. It makes it much easier for people to find the page that's relevant for whatever they're looking for students to look for support, or for faculty to find other pages that might be helpful. So we have a generative AI, which you can get a summary of your page and then just edit that. And we also have meta tags. So if you click on the generate with AI, you'll get a whole bunch of tags that may or may not be applicable to your page, but it's usually, and it's a longer list than you'll need. And we find it's easy to give people a long list of possible tags and then just have them click that little light blue X on all the ones that don't really apply. And it's been quite useful for alleviating that tedious and often a reverse thought process. So usually when you're writing a textbook, you're trying to think in one way, which is very like, let's explain, let's explain, let's explain. So to step back and write a summary, frequently changing your gears more than is comfortable. And often we just find that people just never write their summaries. They just leave pages without summaries. So all that's accessible within that LibreTexts Conductor. There's also links to the page. So you'll find there's a link in the conductor to the textbook, and there's a link from the textbook back to the conductor. There's also a link in the conductor to the Commons page, and there's a link from the Commons page to the conductor. We're trying to make that project management within that as useful as possible. So when you get to this point that things look good. You've had your auditors take a look at it. You've had your team members edit each other's pages. And you're ready for this to go out there and get published into all the right portions. For those of you in LibreNet, you might want it published not just to the Commons, but you'll also want it to be published to your school's Commons. All that is done by our team after you request it to be published. As a reminder, published books, both are editable with the authoring team. Only published books have all of the features. So we sometimes say, have a faculty member who goes, I'd like to see the PDF version of this. Like, well, we don't generate the PDF version of this until it's published. And only the published books will show up in all of those resources for being discoverable by the public. And the only real difference is unpublished books are only available to people that are on that authoring team, which is set within the conductor. When you request the publishing, you'll notice that your book is not published because you'll only have an OBID project link here, which takes you to the textbook. You won't have all those other ones, possibly. Like they won't obviously work linking to the conductor. Sorry, won't make to the Commons or anything like that. You'll just have a very basic look. And you can request that. Do I have my little blue button? By either emailing our team or you'll have one of us on your project typically anyway. You can just message us right in there. We have workflows that we'll go through in future detail, but by the time you're getting close to publishing, we'll have been working with you and communicating with you, and you can let us know that it's ready to go. So quick step back. I wanted to quickly say a quick little summary. First month, if you don't have a login for LibreTexts, the step-by-step instructions of how to do that are in last month's webinar, along with all of the resources that we have available to you and your students in last month's webinar. This webinar, we talked a lot about the conductor and getting started in writing your book and where you get those resources and put them in there. Next webinar, we'll talk about basic editing and remixing. So if you want, keep an eye out for that next newsletter that Jennifer will send out and sign up for that one. And we'll go through kind of like this, but getting you started on actually editing. So if you want to give yourself a timeline, you can do that. And then we'll keep working on from there. Some things I didn't talk about, but I wanted to mention. We do have lots of interactive things you can put into your textbook. So right into the textbook itself, you can put 3D molecule viewers, you can put protein structures, orbitals, you can put in embedded graphs, so Plot 3D. We also have our homework system. You can actually put homework system questions straight into your textbook. So if you want to have some formative assessment that's there and gets feedback but not graded, for instance, you can do that. We have embedded data encoding that we're currently getting revitalized right now. So if you teach like a stats class and you want people to dynamically make histograms and change the bin sizes, you can have them do that right inside of your textbook. If you're used to using H5P, we have a studio for editing H5P, integrating those either into your homework as questions, or you can put them into your textbook as interactive elements. And then we do have within our homework system, a writing analytics and assessment program. All these tools are in that first part of the launch pad there. In terms of extra support, these monthly webinars are planned and organized by our academy, which is newly launched in 2025. That's my role is the faculty support person for building these academy resources. It's a new feature, so if this is the first you're hearing about it, don't worry, that's why. We offer free monthly webinars, which this was number 2. In the summer, there's a LibreFest, which will be continuing, which is a 4-day, 5-day, I can't remember how many days, but it's depending a little bit every year, where we have intensive, multiple hour-long workshops every day to walk you through lots of these things and show you exactly how to do all these things and give you some support group with breakout sessions and whatnot. Oktoberfest is when we do a 1-day kind of crash course on it, and it's in October. We also do have other options for signing up for in-person or virtual workshops, cohort training. So if your school wants to have a bunch of people all work on textbook at the same time for a year, you can make an institutional cohort, and then we will work with us to kind of walk through that. Or for a discipline-based one, maybe you've got a bunch of chemistry friends from around the country, then you're all going to be working on a new inorganic textbook. Awesome. Then you can work on that together. Or you have multiple chemists working on different books. We have asynchronous training modules that will be developed in the next couple months. A lot of these webinars, once they get done, will get turned into asynchronous training modules so that you can get that training and like quizzing to make sure you get certifications and things like that to build these professional development modules. And then we also, just to throw this out there, if you've got a grant that you're working on to work on building these materials for your campus, or you've got internal funding for getting something off the ground for OER projects or zero cost textbooks, um, or a project that has a bunch of OER material that you've built and you kind of want to put it all into our library or have a team work on building that, reach out to us. We help out, and we frequently co-write with grants as the dissemination mechanism for those other projects. And lastly, a quick plug for the LibreNet. If you are not a member of the LibreNet institution, those custom textbooks, so if you want to contribute regular old textbooks to the bookshelf, you can do that as many times as you'd like. If you want to make customized textbooks that are just for your school, you're allowed to have up to 5 of those for your campus without joining our consortium. And you get, if you do join the consortium, you get discounts on certain things. You get access to a 2-hour jumpstart training for your campus to get them off the ground. And you get more access to our support team as well. And I will emphasize that we are not a for-profit thing at all. And this is basically to help maintain those services for your campus. And